Professor David Weisbrot is a former Dean of Law at the University of Papua New Guinea. He's now Professor of Legal Policy at the US Studies Centre at Sydney University. David Weisbrot, welcome to the program.
My pleasure, Jim.
First up, do you think these elections will be free and fair?
I think they will be within the usual kind of craziness of Papua New Guinea. PNG's never had other than a constitutional change of government. The elections are very widely followed and hard fought. Enormous amount of community participation and interest. And I think there'll be messes around the edges. There'll be the odd bit of violence. There'll be somebody trying to run off with a box of ballots or trying to stuff the ballot box. But by and large, compared with most parts of the world, the elections are free and fair and very heavily subscribed.
Just how much does the quality of the electoral rolls threaten to jeopardise the process? I know the PNG Electoral Commission did have problems bringing them up to date, and there's always talk of phantom voters and dead voters, for example.
Well, it's a massive undertaking in PNG. There are 111 electorates. There's about 7 million people now. Very rough terrain. People move around. People change names as part of sort of customary life. And so maintaining the rolls must be very difficult. Australia's provided a lot of assistance to the PNG Electoral Commission. I think if there's a modicum of goodwill, as there normally is, I think they should manage to get through it as long as people can prove who they are and that they should be on the rolls. It's a 2-week voting period. It's not just one day as in Australia, so that should help as well.
You mentioned the potential for violence in the highlands. There are also parts of it, at least notoriously inaccessible. Is there a danger that there will be anger as a consequence of people being unable to vote because of the remoteness of some of the locations and the difficulty of getting to polling places?
Well, there can be, but that's why they do it over a 2-week period. People in PNG will walk for days to get to a polling place. I think that will normally be sorted out. I mean, they've had the same problems for the 35 years or so since independence, and it normally just sorts itself out.
Now, politics in PNG is always pretty tumultuous, but I think you'd have to say that the events of the last few months have been pretty unprecedented. Do you think that the power struggle between Peter O'Neill and Michael Somare, a protracted one, is a reflection of just what's at stake in this election, that whoever got to be Prime Minister in the lead-up to the election was in the box seat to get the lion's share of the extraordinary bounty starting to be realised from PNG's latest resources boom?
Well, incumbency must be important because you can see how hard the two sides have fought over it for the last couple of months. On the other hand, the history in PNG is about half the members of parliament don't get returned at each election. So incumbency itself is not the determining factor. Also, there are 46 parties that are registered for the election. There are about 4,000 candidates running in the 111 seats. So I think the people who get elected may bear only a passing resemblance to the last parliament. And I hope that this election will have a cleansing effect on the events of the last few months, which were really fractious.
I interviewed that great PNG reformer, Samakiri Marata, a few weeks ago, and he expressed great concern about the amount of money being thrown around in PNG politics at the moment. Do you think the sheer quantity of cash that seems to be there does have a danger of undermining Papua New Guinea's democracy?
Absolutely. I mean, money has a way of corroding or corrupting democracy in every country. Compared with many other countries, the amounts are relatively small. And certainly my personal experience that people in PNG will happily take the money or the beer or the four-wheel drive and then vote the way they were intending to vote anyway. So I'm not sure the extent to which it's going to change people's votes.
There is another issue. In the past, some MPs have been elected with less than 10% of the vote. There are up to 30 candidates in some electorates. Would PNG's democracy be healthier, do you think, if single-member electorates were replaced with multi-member constituencies?
Well, it probably would help, and in PNG, where no single party has ever ruled in its own right, they're usually coalitions. They're always coalitions. In fact, not just coalitions of two parties, but often 5 or 10 or 15 parties. So it may be that the multi-member electorates would work much better in that respect. I don't think it's a particular problem, though, in PNG. It's worked well over time. The fact that there are lots and lots of people running in each seat, up to 30, 40, 50 people, is evidence of how strongly people feel about the system and their willingness to participate in democratic processes. They are experimenting with some optional preferential voting now to try to get the percentages up rather than the single first past the post system that operated in previous times.
I think the argument goes something like this, that if you did have multi-member constituencies, the idea, which has been prevalent in PNG politics for a very long time, that the elected MP is effectively an ATM for the electorate, a cash machine for the electorate, would be minimised because you would spread the representation to a degree. You don't think that that might be the case?
They definitely do need to have a period of constitutional review and reform in PNG. The events of previous months showed that there are some structural problems in the Constitution where, in my view, the judges were absolutely right to say that the government of the day under Michael Somare had a constitutional mandate, but the politicians in the opposition were absolutely right to say that under hundreds of years of Westminster tradition, they held the majority of the support on the floor of Parliament. And we have a constitutional system at the moment that didn't anticipate that, and that must be fixed. It really cannot be allowed to linger. So I think when PNG is undertaking this constitutional review, they should be looking at a number of options, including multi-member electorates, proportionate voting, and so on, to try to get around some of these historical problems.
But are you confident then that PNG's democracy can survive this assault on the separation of powers, if I can put it that way, where we've seen Parliament overriding Supreme Court justices, the Chief Justice being charged with sedition, the Deputy Prime Minister ordering soldiers and police about? This is not particularly healthy, is it really?
No, it was certainly the biggest challenge to democracy in Papua New Guinea, and I think very unhealthy and unhelpful, particularly with the arrest of the Chief Justice and one of the other judges. I think that's probably the low point in PNG democracy. On the other hand, we're now moving to elections. They'll be, I think, free and fair, as we discussed earlier. And again, I hearken back to the history of PNG, which people didn't think was going to last very long, and yet 37 years later, quite a thriving democracy in which a high proportion of people vote. They accept the outcome of the vote, and there's never been other than a constitutional change of government. Very few countries like PNG have the head of the military step down to contest a highly difficult electorate. I think in almost every other third world country or other country, the head of the military thinks they are in charge. In Papua New Guinea, some years ago, Brigadier General Ted Dira resigned his position in order to contest a seat that he had no tremendous prospect of winning. He did win in the end.
David Weisbrot, thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure, Jim.